Rip. The sound tore through the heavy silence of the 50th floor boardroom like a razor blade slicing through silk. The thick, textured parchment of my grandfather Garrick's original $40 million will didn't just tear. It shredded into 4 neat pieces under my grip. I let my fingers relax, allowing the fragments to flutter down onto the polished mahogany table. They landed right in the center of a monogrammed silver tray. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody in the room breathed. Then Uncle Raymond let out a sharp, ugly bark of a laugh. Beside him, his daughter Tiffany smirked, leaning back in her ergonomic leather chair, crossing her legs with a slow, smug satisfaction. "You stupid, desperate little bitch," Raymond spat, his face flushing a deep, triumphant red. "You just committed legal suicide. There is no backup copy. You get nothing now." They honestly thought I had lost my mind. They believed that by destroying that document, the state's default intestate succession laws would kick in, automatically dividing the entire Sterling Empire among the living bloodline, leaving me, the orphaned granddaughter, out in the freezing Chicago cold without a single dime. People on the internet love to obsess over those flashy revenge stories where the mistreated protagonist ruins their enemies with a loud, dramatic outburst. But looking at the cold, predatory grins of the greedy heirs sitting across from me, I knew that real-life vengeance didn't work that way. It required absolute patience, a completely straight face, and a very specific kind of bait. And right on cue, a new sound broke the heavy tension of the room. Clap, clap, clap. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. It wasn't Raymond. It was Marcus Vance, my grandfather's lifelong personal attorney. He slowly rose from the far end of the long table, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. There wasn't a hint of panic on his face. Instead, his lips curled into a razor-sharp, chilling smile, and his eyes locked onto mine with absolute roaring approval. He kept clapping, the sound echoing sharply off the floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the skyline. Raymond's laugh died instantly in his throat. Tiffany's smirk melted into a confused frown. "Brilliant," Vance whispered, finally lowering his hands and resting his palms on the table. "Absolutely brilliant, Cassidy." My family thought I had just handed them a fortune on a silver platter. They had no earthly idea that Vance's applause wasn't a sign of madness. It was the opening bell for their execution. To understand how a 22-year-old girl ends up ripped off a $40 million fortune in front of a pack of wolves, you have to understand the 3 years of pure, unadulterated hell that led to that moment. The Sterling estate was 20,000 square feet of cold, gray limestone, but to me it smelled like a hospital ward. It smelled of industrial bleach, lavender oil, and the stale, suffocating scent of slow death. Garrick Sterling, the brutal, self-made titan who had conquered the Midwest real estate market, had been reduced to a fragile, translucent old man who couldn't remember his own middle name. Alzheimer's was a thief that stole him from me piece by piece, day by day. But I stayed. When my mother died of cancer when I was 12, grandfather was the only one who showed up at the funeral. He took me in, raised me, and bought me my first typewriter. So when the diagnosis hit during my sophomore year at Northwestern University, I didn't hesitate. I packed my bags, dropped my classes, and moved into the east wing of the mansion to become his primary caretaker. My friends were out at bars, networking, and living their 20s. I was awake at 4 a.m., learning how to crush heavy heart pills into applesauce, dealing with violent mood swings, and lifting a 90-year-old man out of a specialized medical bed. And where was the rest of the family? Uncle Raymond only called the house when the quarterly dividend checks from Sterling Corp were 5 minutes late. Tiffany only breezed through the front gates when she needed her corporate black card authorized for a shopping spree in Paris. The massive house became a ghost town, save for me, a rotating shift of underpaid night nurses, and the steady mocking beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor. By the second year, Raymond started suffocating us financially. He had taken over as interim CEO of the company, claiming grandfather's illness made him unfit to lead. Soon after, the specialized medical funds for grandfather's private care mysteriously dried up. Budget cuts within the LLC. Cassidy, Raymond had told me over a cold, dismissive text message, sent from a luxury ski resort in Aspen. We all have to make sacrifices. I had to sell my own Honda Civic just to afford the high-grade liquid nutrition and the experimental medication that kept grandfather's seizures at bay. I cooked, I cleaned, and I washed his soiled linens by hand when Raymond cut off the budget for the laundry service. I grew thin, dark circles permanently bruised the skin under my eyes, and my back ached every single hour of the day. The breaking point came on a freezing, rainy Tuesday afternoon, roughly 6 months before the end. Tiffany burst through the front doors, her wet umbrella dripping dirty rainwater onto the antique Persian rugs. She reeked of expensive Chanel perfume and cheap gin from a liquid lunch. She didn't even bother to check on the frail old man sleeping in the next room. She walked straight up to me in the kitchen, demanding the keys to the family's summer estate in Lake Geneva. "Grandfather is resting, Tiffany," I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion as I stirred a pot of low-sodium broth. "And he can't sign a lease or a release form anyway. His cognitive state is too low today." Tiffany scoffed, her eyes rolling so hard it looked painful. She marched over, her sharp, acrylic nails digging painfully into the soft skin of my collarbone as she shoved me back against the counter. "Listen to me, you little charity case," she hissed, her breath hot and sour against my face. "You are a glorified maid here. An orphan living on our scraps." The exact second the old man gasps his last breath, "I am personally going to watch the moving trucks throw your raggedy-ass bags into the gutter. Stop acting like you own a single brick of this place." She reached into her Prada purse, pulled out a crumpled wad of $100 bills, and threw them straight at my face. The paper hit my cheek and scattered across the sticky kitchen floor. "There's your tip for the week. Get me the keys." I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I stood perfectly still, watching her walk away with a triumphant bounce in her step. Then I knelt down, picked up the crumpled bills from the floor, smoothed them out with a trembling hand, and put them in the jar used to buy grandfather's oxygen tanks. I swallowed my pride, letting the humiliation curdle into something cold, hard, and razor-sharp inside my chest. They wanted a war. They just didn't know I was already digging the trenches. The disease was a cruel monster, but every once in a long while, it left the cage unlocked. It happened at precisely 3:14 a.m. on a Thursday in late November. The room was freezing, the wind howling against the glass. I was curled up in the armchair beside his bed, nursing a lukewarm cup of instant coffee, my eyelids heavy as lead. Suddenly a dry, raspy cough broke the silence. I rushed to his side, adjusting his pillows. But when I looked down, my breath caught. His eyes, usually cloudy, vacant, and staring at ghosts, were suddenly piercingly blue. Clear. Terrifyingly present. "Cassidy," he whispered. His voice was incredibly weak, but his grip on my wrist was tight, his skin rough like sandpaper. "Grandpa? I'm here. Do you want some water?" "No. No time," he rasped, his chest heaving under the blanket. "Listen to me very carefully, my sweet girl. The fog. It's coming back and I only have a minute." He wet his cracked lips, his gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "Raymond. He thinks I don't know. He's been stripping the company assets, bleeding the tenants dry. They think I'm already a corpse." Tears pricked my eyes, but I forced myself to nod. "I know, Grandpa. I know. Go to the basement," he whispered, his voice trembling but laced with steel. "Under the loose floorboard directly beneath the old iron wine rack, there is a small heavy mahogany box. Do not open it. Do not let Raymond's lawyers know it exists. The day my heart stops, you take that box directly to Marcus Vance. No one else. Do you promise me, Cassidy?" "I promise, Grandpa. I swear." A faint, tired smile touched his lips, and he slowly let go of my wrist. "They think they are wolves, my child. But they forgot who built the cage." Then just like that, the light behind his eyes vanished. The cloudy, empty stare rushed back, and he began mumbling incoherently about a train station in 1974. The thief had come back to lock the door, but the key was already in my hands. The flatline didn't sound like a dramatic alarm from a television show. It was just a steady, high-pitched, monotonous drone that cut through the freezing gray dawn of a Tuesday in January. Grandfather was gone. His skin was already turning the color of winter frost, cold and stiff beneath my fingers as I gently closed his eyes. I stood by his bed for a long time, the silence of the massive limestone mansion pressing heavily against my eardrums. There were no tears left in me. I had done my crying over the last 3 years. What remained inside my chest was a cold, quiet vacuum. Within 2 hours, the front gates didn't just open. They were practically taken off their hinges. Uncle Raymond and Tiffany didn't arrive in an ambulance or a discreet funeral car. They showed up with a small army. 3 corporate attorneys in bespoke charcoal suits, 2 PR consultants clutching tablets, and a local news crew Raymond had tipped off to capture the tragic passing of a Chicago icon. The hypocrisy was thick enough to choke on. Raymond stood before the rolling cameras on the front lawn, dabbing his dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, delivering a rehearsed speech about his beloved father and the unbreakable bond of family. Tiffany stood right next to him, wearing an oversized pair of black designer sunglasses, looking like a grieving widow from a Hollywood movie. I was shoved into the shadows. Literally. When the cameras moved inside the grand foyer, Raymond's PR handler pulled me into the pantry, his hand gripping my elbow a little too hard. "Cassidy, sweetie," he whispered, his breath smelling heavily of peppermint and espresso. "Let's keep you out of the background shots. The tired, unwashed look doesn't really fit the family brand for the evening broadcast. Go upstairs." The funeral 2 days later was an absolute circus. It was held at a historic cathedral downtown, filled to the brim with local politicians, real estate tycoons, and cameras. I was forced to sit in the third row, behind Raymond's business associates, while the 2 people who hadn't spoken a kind word to grandfather in a decade occupied the front pew, weeping on cue whenever the flashes went off. But the real horror show began at the wake, held back at the estate. The guests were sipping high-end bourbon and eating catered oysters. I was in the library trying to gather a few of my mother's old scrapbooks into a cardboard box, when the doors slammed open. Tiffany stood there, her face contorted into a mask of pure theatrical panic. She wasn't wearing her sunglasses now. Her eyes were wide and she was breathing heavily. "Where is it?" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the chatter from the main hall. "Where the hell is it, Cassidy?" Before I could answer, Raymond marched in, flanked by 2 of his personal security guards. "What's going on here?" he demanded, though his voice lacked any real surprise. It was a setup. I could feel it in the sudden drop of my stomach. "Grandfather's vintage Patek Philippe watch," Tiffany yelled, making sure her voice carried out into the hallway where guests were mingling. "The solid gold one he promised to my fiancé. It was in his master bedroom drawer this morning, and now it's gone. And look what she's doing. She's packing boxes." "I haven't been near his bedroom today, Tiffany," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were clenched into tight fists inside my sweater pockets. "I've been in here the entire afternoon." "Search her," Raymond ordered the security guards. "You don't have the right to touch me," I snapped, stepping back. But Raymond didn't wait for the guards. He stepped forward himself, his heavy, expensive frame lunging at me. He grabbed my winter coat, which was draped over the back of a chair, and violently turned it upside down. Clink! A heavy gold watch tumbled out of the deep inner pocket, striking the hardwood floor with a sharp metallic ring. It rolled right to Raymond's shiny leather shoe. A collective gasp echoed from the doorway. 6 prominent family friends and 2 reporters were standing there, watching the whole thing play out. "You ungrateful little thief," Raymond roared, picking up the watch and holding it up like a trophy for the onlookers. "We let you live here out of the kindness of our hearts. We let you play nurse while you were systematically robbing my dying father blind." Tiffany sneered, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a vicious, venomous whisper that only I could hear. "I told you I'd throw your raggedy bags into the gutter, bitch." She then turned to the crowd, wiping a fake tear. "This is too much. First she abuses him by neglecting his care, and now she despoils his memory. Get her out of this house. Now." Raymond looked at the security guards. "Throw her out. If she takes anything other than the clothes on her back, call the police and press charges for grand theft. She is legally barred from this property as of this second." The guards didn't hesitate. They grabbed my arms, dragging me through the grand foyer, past the whispering, judging eyes of people I had known my entire life. They shoved me out the massive front doors, throwing my empty cardboard box after me. The heavy iron gates slammed shut. It was 8 p.m. A freezing, bitter Chicago rain was pouring down, soaking through my thin sweater within seconds. My phone was in my hand, its battery sitting at 12%. I had no car, no money, and no home. But I had something else. An hour before the wake started, knowing exactly who my uncle was, I had slipped down into the damp, dark wine cellar in the basement. I had crawled under the rusted iron wine rack, scraped my knuckles raw against the rough concrete, and pried up the loose floorboard my grandfather had told me about. Hidden beneath my soaked sweater, pressed tightly against my ribs, was a heavy dust-covered mahogany box. I didn't call an Uber. I walked. I walked 12 blocks through the biting, icy downpour, my boots squelching in the freezing puddles, my teeth chattering so hard they ached. By the time I reached the downtown high-rise where Marcus Vance kept his private legal office, I looked like a drowned rat. The security guard in the lobby looked at me with deep disgust, but when I whispered Vance's name, he reluctantly called up. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a plush leather chair inside Vance's warmth-filled, mahogany-lined office. A dry-wool blanket was wrapped around my shoulders, and a mug of hot black coffee was warming my frozen palms. Marcus Vance sat across from me, his expression grim. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with a quiet, burning intensity. He took the dusty mahogany box from the desk, slid a small silver key into the lock, and popped it open. Inside lay two things. A thick vintage parchment document tied with a black silk ribbon, grandfather's true, original will. And right next to it, a heavy linen envelope, sealed with thick dark red wax bearing the Sterling family crest. Vance didn't open the envelope. He just ran his thumb over the red wax, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "They framed me, Marcus," I whispered, my voice shaking from the lingering cold. "They put the gold watch in my coat. They threw me out in the street. Everyone thinks I'm a monster." Vance leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "I know they did, Cassidy. Your uncle has been preparing for this for months. He's bribed 2 of your grandfather's rotating night nurses to sign affidavits claiming you were medically negligent. He wants you completely discredited so that when we go to probate court, any objection you make looks like the desperate lies of a bitter, caught thief." He tapped the red wax seal on the envelope. "But your grandfather was a 3-step chess player, Cassidy. He knew exactly what Raymond would do. He wrote this 6 months ago, during a night when his mind was as sharp as a diamond." Vance leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Tomorrow morning, Raymond's legal team is going to call an emergency meeting at the corporate headquarters to execute what they think is the only copy of the estate plan. They are going to offer you a miserable, insulting crumb, just to get you to sign a waiver of non-disclosure." He slid the parchment document across the desk toward me. "To make your grandfather's plan work, you have to let them think they've won completely. You have to let them humiliate you one more time in front of everyone. You have to play the broken, desperate victim until the absolute last second." Vance paused, his voice dropping an octave. "It's going to be brutal, Cassidy. They will tear you apart in that room. Can you handle it?" I looked down at the parchment paper, then at the raw, bloody scrapes on my knuckles. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cold vacuum in my chest replace itself with something burning, hot, and electric. "Give me the pen," I said. The call came at exactly 7:30 the next morning. It wasn't from Raymond. It was from a junior associate at his high-powered law firm, sounding completely bored as he read from a script. "Cassidy Sterling? You are required to attend a mandatory estate review at the Sterling Corp headquarters, 50th floor, at 10 a.m. sharp. If you fail to appear, your uncle will file a formal restraining order and proceed with criminal grand theft charges regarding the family heirloom recovered from your possession last night. Do not be late." The line went dead before I could say a word. I spent the next 2 hours sitting in the small bathroom of the cheap motel Marcus Vance had paid for, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. I purposely didn't cover the dark, heavy circles under my eyes with makeup. I left my hair slightly unkempt, pulling it back into a loose, messy ponytail. I put on the same faded denim jacket and worn-out boots from the night before. I needed to look like a girl who was on the absolute brink of starvation and emotional collapse. At 8:45 a.m. I took out my phone. My fingers were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of the performance I was about to give. I opened a text thread with Tiffany. "Tiffany, please," I typed, keeping the phrasing desperate, broken, and small. "I'm at a motel off the highway. I don't have any money for food. I know you guys hate me, but please tell Uncle Raymond I won't fight the will. I have the original paper grandfather signed 3 years ago, the one before he got really sick. I'll give it to you. Just please don't let the police arrest me. Just give me the deed to my mom's old cottage in Evanston. It's all I want. Please. I hit send. 3 minutes later, the 3 little dots appeared. Then vanished. Then appeared again. We'll talk at the office. Don't be late, thief, came the reply. I smiled. The hook was in the water. What Raymond and Tiffany didn't know was that their own legal team had spent the early hours of the morning uncovering a massive, terrifying surprise in the corporate registries. When Raymond had forced his way into grandfather's private files after his death, his lawyers had discovered the existence of an old ironclad irrevocable trust titled the Sterling Century Fund. It held $40 million in liquid capital and controlled exactly 100% of the voting shares in Sterling Corporation. But there was a catch. A massive legal wall that Raymond's expensive corporate sharks couldn't breach. The trust document stated that upon Garrick Sterling's death, the entire fund would be distributed according to the instructions laid out in the physical, original copy of his final will and testament, which was kept in the possession of the primary beneficiary and the family attorney. Without that specific physical document, the trust would remain completely locked in legal limbo for years. And if Raymond tried to use a fraudulent or altered copy, a forensic audit would immediately trigger an automated IRS investigation into the company's recent asset stripping. In short, Raymond was sitting on a mountain of gold, but I had the only key to the vault. My text message had just told them that the key was coming straight to them, carried by a terrified, broken orphan who was willing to trade it for a dilapidated, 2-bedroom cottage in the suburbs. At 9:45 a.m., I stepped out of a yellow cab in front of the Sterling Corp headquarters. The building was a towering obelisk of black glass and polished steel, reflecting the dismal gray Chicago sky. It was a monument to my grandfather's ruthless ambition. As I walked through the revolving doors, the sterile, warm air of the lobby hit my face, smelling of expensive floor wax and success. The marble floors gleamed like ice. I made it exactly 3 steps toward the security desk before a sharp, familiar clicking sound echoed behind me. Well, look what the rain washed in. I turned slowly. Tiffany was walking toward me, her 4-inch Christian Louboutin heels clicking rhythmically against the stone. She was wearing a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than my entire college tuition, and she was flanked by 2 large men in dark corporate security uniforms. You actually showed up, Tiffany said, stopping a few feet away, her eyes scanning my faded jacket and messy hair with intense, glittering satisfaction. I figured you'd be halfway to Canada by now with whatever else you managed to steal from my grandfather's house. I didn't steal anything, Tiffany, I whispered, lowering my head, letting my shoulders slump inward to make myself look smaller, weaker. I just want this over with. Did you talk to your dad about the cottage? Oh, we'll talk about the cottage, sweetie, she said, a cruel, mocking smile stretching across her perfectly painted lips. But first, let's see the goods. You said you brought the original will. It's in my bag, I said, clutching my cheap canvas tote folder tightly against my hip, stepping back as if I were afraid she would snatch it. I'm not showing it to you out here in the lobby. Marcus Vance said we have to do this in the boardroom. Tiffany's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, ugly entitlement. She didn't like being told no. She nodded slightly to the 2 security guards behind her. Before I could react, the 2 large men stepped forward, efficiently flanking me. One of them grabbed my upper arms, pinning them to my sides with a vice-like grip, while the other violently ripped the canvas tote bag out of my hands. Hey! Stop! You can't do that! I cried out, making my voice pitch high with panic, ensuring that several office workers passing through the lobby turned to look at us. Give it back! Shut up, Cassidy! Tiffany snapped, her fingers digging into my bag like a vulture ripping into prey. She pulled out a thick vintage parchment document tied with a black silk ribbon. She untied it with her teeth, quickly rolling it open. Her eyes flew down the page, scanning the elaborate cursive script and the heavy, unmistakable ink signature of Garrick Sterling at the bottom. A look of raw, unadulterated ecstasy washed over her face. She held $40 million in her hands. She pulled out her iPhone, hitting a speed dial on speakerphone. Picked up on the first ring. Daddy, Tiffany crowed. her voice echoing off the high marble ceiling of the lobby as she stared down at me with absolute contempt. I have it. I just took it right out of her bag. It's the real thing. The original parchment from 3 years ago. Raymond's deep, gravelly voice bounced through the phone's speaker, filled with a triumphant, booming satisfaction. Excellent. Bring her up to the 50th floor right now. Let's finish this little rat once and for all. The security guard let go of my arms, tossing my empty canvas bag onto the floor. Tiffany rolled the parchment back up, clutching it tightly against her chest like a weapon. Move, she ordered, gesturing toward the private express elevators. I knelt down, my knees hitting the cold marble floor as I slowly picked up my empty bag. I kept my face turned down toward the stone, hiding the fact that the terror in my eyes had completely vanished. Instead, a slow, freezing smile was spreading across my face. They had taken the bait. Hook, line, and sinker. They had the document they thought would save them. They had absolutely no idea they were carrying their own death warrant up to the 50th floor. The express elevator ride up to the 50th floor made my ears pop twice. It was a silent vertical rocket ship lined with brushed steel and mirrors. Tiffany stood right beside me, the sharp scent of her Chanel perfume filling the enclosed space, suffocating and sharp. She didn't look at me. She just stared at her reflection, adjusting her diamond earrings, her long acrylic nails tapping a frantic, victorious rhythm against the glass screen of her phone. Tap, tap, tap. Every strike of her nail felt like a countdown. When the doors finally slid open, the air conditioning hit me like a slap of ice. The executive floor of Sterling Corp was empty, cleared out on Raymond's orders to ensure absolute privacy for the execution. We walked down a long carpeted hallway lined with black and white photographs of skyscrapers grandfather had built. At the very end were the double oak doors of the main boardroom. Tiffany pushed them open with a theatrical flourish, stepping inside ahead of me. Look what I found downstairs, Dad, she announced, her voice dripping with artificial glee. The stray finally came home. The boardroom was massive, a sprawling fortress of glass and polished mahogany that overlooked the entire Chicago skyline. The gray winter clouds outside made the room feel dark, despite the recessed lighting overhead. At the center of the 20-foot table sat Uncle Raymond. He looked massive, his expensive tailored suit barely concealing the thick, bloated frame of a man who had spent his life consuming things that didn't belong to him. Flanking him were 4 men in identical charcoal suits, corporate defense attorneys from the city's most ruthless firm. They sat with their laptops open, their expressions blank, like gargoyles waiting for a signal to tear into a carcass. But my eyes went straight to the far end of the table. Marcus Vance sat there, completely isolated from the pack. He looked smaller than he had the night before in his private office. His tie was slightly loosened, his silver hair a bit messy, and he was repeatedly dabbing the back of his neck with a wrinkled white handkerchief. When he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a hollow, frantic desperation. He gave me a microscopic shake of his head, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted a stack of folders. God, he was a good actor. He was playing the part of a defeated, cornered old lawyer to absolute perfection. Sit down, Cassidy, Raymond said, his deep, gravelly voice booming off the glass walls. He didn't rise. He didn't offer a greeting. He just pointed a thick, ring-adorned finger at a solitary leather chair directly across from his legal team. I walked over slowly, letting my boots drag against the carpet, and sank into the chair. I pulled my faded denim jacket tighter around my shoulders, shivering on purpose. Tiffany stepped up to the table and slammed the original parchment will down right in front of Raymond. Thud. The heavy paper slid across the polished wood, stopping inches from his gold watch. She had it in her bag, Tiffany sneered, taking her seat next to him. She tried to play dumb in the lobby, but I took it. She's terrified, Dad. She's already crying. Raymond picked up the parchment. He unrolled it slowly, his eyes scanning the vintage cursive text, the specific legal stamps, and finally the heavy faded ink signature of my grandfather at the bottom. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face, crinkling the skin around his eyes. It was the look of a man who had just confirmed his status as a god. Well, well, Cassidy, Raymond murmured, tossing the will onto the silver tray in the center of the table. You actually managed to do one smart thing in your pathetic life. You brought me the key. One of the lawyers beside him, a man named Bradley with a face as sharp and bloodless as a hatchet, slid a thick 50-page document toward me. The paper was heavy, crisp, and stamped with corporate seals. "This is a comprehensive mutual release, non-disclosure and liability waiver," Bradley said, his tone completely flat, devoid of any human warmth. "By signing this, Ms. Sterling, you formally relinquish any and all present or future claims to the estate of Garrick Sterling, including but not limited to the Sterling Century Fund and all physical real estate. You also agree to a permanent, lifetime gag order. You will never speak to the press, you will never publish any written material, and you will never discuss the internal affairs of this family with anyone." I stared at the document, letting a heavy, suffocating silence fill the room. The only sound was the low, electric hum of the building's ventilation system. "And what if I don't sign it?" I whispered, keeping my voice small, trembling, and hoarse. I looked up, letting Raymond see the raw exhaustion in my face. "What if I want a judge to look at how you treated grandfather? What if I tell them you cut off his medical funds?" Raymond let out a sharp, mocking snort. He leaned forward, his massive forearms resting on the table, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "If you don't sign it by 10:15 a.m. Cassidy, Bradley here makes a phone call," Raymond said, tapping his fingers against his gold watch. "And by 10:30, the Chicago Police Department will execute an arrest warrant for you. We have the gold Patek Philippe watch you stole from my father's bedroom last night. We have 20 witnesses who saw it fall out of your coat. That's grand larceny. A Class 1 felony in the state of Illinois." Bradley slid another blue folder toward me, opening it to reveal several typed pages covered in legal signatures. "Furthermore," Bradley chimed in, "we have signed, notarized affidavits from Nurse Jenkins and Nurse Gable. They have testified under oath that during your time as primary caretaker, you systematically withheld prescribed neurological medication from Mr. Sterling to accelerate his cognitive decline. Elder abuse, criminal negligence, reckless endangerment. We have enough paper here to bury you under a state penitentiary for the next 15 years, kid. You won't even see the inside of a probate court. You'll go straight to a cell." The sheer weight of their lies was breathtaking. They had spent months buying people off, building a digital and paper fortress to crush a 22-year-old girl whose only crime was loving an old man. The anger inside me flared hot and violent, but I forced it down, burying it deep beneath the mask of the broken orphan. I let my lower lip quiver. I squeezed my eyes shut, letting two perfect, fake tears squeeze past my lashes and run down my pale cheeks. I put my hands over my face, my shoulders shaking. "That's a lie." I sobbed into my palms, my voice muffled. "You know that's a lie. I took care of him. I stayed awake for 72 hours straight when his fever broke. You guys were in Aspen. You were in Paris. You didn't care." Tiffany laughed out loud, a high grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh boo-hoo. Save the tears for the cellmate, Cassidy. Nobody cares about your little sob story. You're a college dropout with a bank account sitting in the negatives. We own this city. Who do you think the judge is going to believe? Us? Or a caught thief?" I lowered my hands, looking at Raymond with wild, desperate eyes. "Please, Uncle Raymond, don't do this." I sent Tiffany a text. "I told you I'd give you the will. Just give me my mother's old cottage in Evanston. It's a tiny house. It's falling apart. It's the only place I have left of her. Please let me have the deed." Raymond pulled a red felt tip pen from his breast pocket. He opened the document in front of him, flipped to the section detailing the family's secondary real estate assets, and drew a massive, aggressive X right through the page. The sound of the pen tearing against the paper was loud in the quiet room. "The Evanston cottage is being demolished next month, Cassidy," Raymond said, his voice entirely devoid of mercy. "We're zoning the entire block for a new luxury condo high-rise. I'm not leaving you a single brick of my father's property. You don't deserve the dirt it stands on." He capped the pen with a loud click and threw it across the table. It rolled over the mahogany, hitting my knuckles. "Here is the final offer," Raymond barked, his face hardening into a mask of pure, absolute authority. "You get $0. You get zero property. You sign that waiver right now, we give you $5,000 in cash for a bus ticket out of Illinois, and we drop the grand theft charges. You leave Chicago today and you never come back. That's the Sterling family discount. Take it or rot. Marcus Vance finally cleared his throat, his voice shaking as he leaned forward from the end of the table. Raymond, please. This is harsh even for you. She is Garrick's blood. She is your sister's daughter. Surely we can set up a small monthly stipend. 10,000 a year just to keep her on her feet? Garrick wouldn't want his granddaughter in the gutter. Raymond turned on Vance like a rabid dog, his eyes flashing with raw fury. Shut your mouth, Marcus. Your contract with Sterling Corp is currently under executive review. One more word out of you, and I'll have the board strip your senior partnership and your pension before the sun goes down tonight. You're an old man living on borrowed time in this firm. Don't throw your life away for a beggar. Vance shrank back into his seat, his face turning pale, his hands trembling as he buried his face in his white handkerchief, letting out a heavy, defeated sigh. He looked utterly broken. Raymond turned back to me, pushing the document closer until it touched my sleeves. Sign it, Cassidy. Sign it and get out of my sight. My patience is officially at zero. I stopped crying. I reached out, my fingers wrapping around the red pen Raymond had thrown at me. I stared at the signature line on the waiver. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, the four corporate lawyers leaning in, their pens ready to countersign, their laptops ready to log the final execution of the estate. Tiffany was grinning so hard her cheeks looked stiff. Then very slowly I let go of the pen. It clicked softly against the wood as it rolled away. I didn't lean back. I didn't look down. I slowly stood up from my leather chair, pulling myself up to my full height. The trembling in my hands was gone. The exhaustion in my face vanished, replaced by a cold, quiet stillness that seemed to shift the entire energy of the room. I reached across the long mahogany table, my hand perfectly steady, and I pulled the original parchment will off the silver tray, sliding it back to my side of the table. Raymond's brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing into slits as his face flushed with a sudden, angry confusion. What the hell do you think you're doing, Cassidy? I told you to sign the waiver. Put that paper down. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice dropping into a quiet, razor-sharp whisper that carried a terrifying amount of weight. You think this piece of paper is the only thing protecting me from you, Uncle Raymond? I asked, a faint, cold smile touching the corners of my lips. You think without this will, you're untouchable? Put the paper down, Cassidy, Raymond repeated, his voice dropping into a low, menacing register. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles along his neck looked like taut cables. You're playing a dangerous game. Leave the will on the tray. I didn't answer him. I didn't even blink. Instead, I slid my thumbs under the top edge of the heavy vintage parchment. I felt the rough, fibrous texture of the paper beneath my skin. The very document my family had spent years plotting to steal, alter, or bury. I looked straight into Raymond's greedy, bloodshot eyes. And then I gripped it tight. And I pulled. Ryup. The sound tore through the heavy silence of the 50th floor boardroom like a razor blade slicing through silk. The thick $40 million document didn't just tear. It shredded. I twisted my wrists, ripping it again crosswise, dividing it into 4 neat, jagged pieces. The violent sound of the fiber snapping apart seemed to echo off the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. I relaxed my fingers, allowing the fragments to flutter down onto the polished mahogany table. They landed right in the center of the monogrammed silver tray, right on top of Raymond's unsigned waiver. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody in the room breathed. The corporate lawyers froze, their pens suspended midair. Then Uncle Raymond let out a sharp, ugly bark of a laugh. It started as a chuckle, then escalated into a booming, breathless roar that shook his heavy frame. Beside him, Tiffany smirked, leaning back in her ergonomic leather chair, crossing her legs with a slow, smug satisfaction. You stupid, desperate little bitch, Raymond spat, his face flushing a deep, triumphant red as he slammed his fist onto the table. You just committed legal suicide. There is no backup copy of that will. Marcus told us himself. That was the only executed original in existence. Tiffany leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands, her eyes glittering with absolute malice. She broke, she whispered loudly to the lawyers. The pressure got to her and she broke. Dad, without a valid will, the state's default intestate succession laws kick in. You get the lion's share as the surviving son and she gets absolutely nothing. She just threw away her only shield. Bradley, their hatchet-faced lawyer, let out a dry, clinical chuckle, already tapping away at his laptop. Documented, he murmured. We have 7 witnesses to the intentional destruction of the primary estate instrument by the claimant. Miss Sterling, you are now entirely at our mercy. And our mercy is expensive. They honestly thought I had lost my mind. They believed they had pushed me over the edge of emotional collapse. They sat there swimming in their own extreme self-complacency, completely blind to the fact that real-life vengeance doesn't look like a loud, dramatic screaming match. It looks like an empty room, a frozen face, and a very specific kind of bait. And right on cue, a new sound broke the heavy, toxic atmosphere of the boardroom. Clap, clap, clap. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. It wasn't Raymond. It wasn't one of the corporate sharks. It was Marcus Vance. The old lawyer slowly rose from the far end of the long table. The frantic, sweating, broken persona he had been projecting for the last hour vanished instantly. He straightened his spine, calmly adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, and slid his wrinkled handkerchief back into his breast pocket. There wasn't a single hint of panic left on his face. Instead, his lips curled into a razor-sharp, chilling smile, and his eyes locked onto mine with absolute roaring approval. He kept clapping, the sharp smack of his palms echoing loudly off the glass walls overlooking the Chicago skyline. Raymond's laugh died instantly in his throat. Tiffany's smug smirk melted into a confused, irritated frown. "Marcus!" Raymond barked, his voice laced with sudden suspicion. "What the hell are you doing? Sit down." "Brilliant," Vance whispered, ignoring Raymond completely. He lowered his hands, resting his palms flat on the mahogany table, leaning forward. "Absolutely brilliant, Cassidy. Your grandfather would have stood up and cheered." "Vance!" Raymond slammed both hands on the table, standing up so fast his heavy leather chair rolled back and hit the wall. "What is the meaning of this? Your client just destroyed her only asset. Why the hell are you clapping?" Vance reached into his leather briefcase. He didn't pull out a standard legal pad. He pulled out the heavy linen envelope we had retrieved from the mahogany box the night before, the one sealed with thick, dark red wax bearing the Sterling family crest. He slid it directly down the center of the table. It slid smoothly over the wood, stopping right next to the shredded pieces of the parchment will. "I am clapping Raymond," Vance said, his voice suddenly dropping its shaky tone, replaced by the booming, authoritative resonance of a man who had spent 40 years dominating courtrooms, "because your niece has just successfully completed your father's final directive. She has just sprung the trap." Bradley leaned over, squinting at the red wax seal. That's a secondary trust amendment," he muttered, his bloodless face suddenly losing what little color it had. "Wait. No. That's not part of the probate registry." "Of course it isn't, Bradley," Vance scoffed, his smile widening into something genuinely terrifying. 6 months ago, Garrick Sterling realized his son was a parasite who was systematically bleeding Sterling Corp dry. He knew that the moment he died, Raymond would use every dirty trick, every bribed nurse, and every fake lawsuit to strip Cassidy of her inheritance. So, he didn't try to fight you in probate court, Raymond. He bypassed it entirely. Vance tapped the red wax seal, breaking it with a sharp, crisp snap. He pulled out a single sheet of heavy blue paper. "This is the executive activation clause for the Sterling Century Fund," Vance announced, his eyes cutting through Raymond like twin lasers. "An irrevocable ironclad offshore structure." Garrick inserted a very specific, highly classified provision called the Ultimate Moral Clause. It dictates that if the heirs, specifically you, Raymond, and you, Tiffany, use financial coercion, legal threats, or fabricated criminal charges to back Cassidy into a corner, to the point where she was forced to proactively destroy the original will in front of the family attorney, that exact act of destruction would serve as the legal trigger. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the frantic, heavy breathing of my uncle. "The trigger for what?" Raymond rasped, a bead of cold sweat finally breaking from his hairline and rolling down his cheek. Vance smiled. "The moment those fibers tore, Raymond 100% of the $40 million liquidity fund, along with all voting shares of Sterling Corp., automatically and permanently transferred into a private, blind trust under the sole ownership of Cassidy Sterling. You don't get a dime. You don't get a share. You don't even get to keep your office. Tiffany stood up, her voice screeching, cracking under the sudden weight of panic. That's impossible. That's illegal. If she destroyed the will, the company belongs to the line of succession. Bradley, tell him he's lying. But Bradley wasn't looking at Tiffany. He was staring at his laptop screen, his fingers hovering over the keys, his lips trembling. "Oh God," the lawyer whispered, his voice completely hollow. "The trust. It just updated on the corporate registry. The electronic shares. They're gone. They're already in her name." "But that's not even the best part," Vance continued, his voice dripping with venomous satisfaction as he looked at Raymond. "Garrick knew you were stripping assets, Raymond. He knew about the $15 million hidden debt and the tax evasion schemes you've been running through the subsidiary LLCs. Under the moral clause, the moment the trust is triggered by your greed, all corporate liabilities, all debts, and all pending legal obligations of Sterling Corp are legally severed from the asset fund and transferred directly, exclusively, and personally to you, Raymond. You didn't just lose the empire. You just inherited a $15 million personal bankruptcy." Raymond's knees buckled. He fell back into his executive chair with a heavy, breathless thud, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at the 4 shredded pieces of paper on the silver tray. The crown was gone. The castle was empty. And the floor beneath his feet was about to give way. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Raymond sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, looking like a man who had just watched his entire life vanish in a magic trick. Tiffany was breathing in short, ragged gasps, her manicured hands clutching the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were turning white. "This isn't real," she whispered, her voice cracking, her eyes darting toward the shredded parchment. "This can't be real. Bradley, do something. Sue her. File an injunction." "An injunction against what, Tiffany?" Marcus Vance asked, his voice entirely devoid of mercy as he gathered his documents back into his briefcase. "You just spent 30 minutes forcing your own legal team to log and document the exact sequence of events. You wanted a record of her destroying the paper? Well, you got it. You signed the execution minutes 5 minutes ago. You literally signed your own financial death warrant." Before Raymond could even find his voice to speak, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom clicked open. It wasn't a maid. It wasn't a secretary. 4 men in dark, identical windbreakers stepped into the room. On the back of each jacket, bold yellow letters spelled out 3 letters that made Bradley instantly close his laptop and raise his hands. IRS. Behind them stood 2 uniformed Chicago police officers. The lead investigator, a sharp-faced woman with a badge clipped to her belt, walked straight to the head of the table. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Tiffany. She stopped right beside Uncle Raymond's chair and produced a heavy laminated document. "Raymond Sterling?" she asked, her tone clinical and cold. "I'm Special Agent Miller with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We have a federal warrant for your arrest regarding grand tax evasion, corporate asset stripping, and wire fraud." "What?" Raymond choked out, his voice reduced to a pathetic high-pitched squeak. "There's been a mistake. My father. The company. Your father's estate provided us with 3 years of encrypted digital ledgers last night, Mr. Sterling," Agent Miller interrupted, nodding to the twin officers. "The ones you thought you deleted from the main server. They were backed up in a private off-site server managed by Mr. Vance here. Stand up, please. Put your hands behind your back." The sound of the metal handcuffs clicking into place was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was crisp, sharp, final. Raymond didn't look like a titan anymore. As the officers pulled him out of his chair, his expensive wool trousers caught on the armrest, making him stumble clumsily. His face was pale, glistening with sweat, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. "Daddy!" Tiffany shrieked, rushing toward him, but an officer stepped in her way, his arm extended. "Ma'am, step back," the officer warned. "You can't do this," she screamed, her perfect manicured facade completely shattering into a mess of ugly tears and smeared mascara. She turned on me, her fingers curling into claws. "You did this. You planned this, you little psycho. You ruined our lives. No, Tiffany, I said, standing up from my chair, my voice calm, smooth, and entirely unbothered. I reached down and picked up the red felt-tip pen Raymond had thrown at me earlier. You ruined your own lives. You just forgot that actions have consequences. Oh, and by the way, the eviction notice for your penthouse in the Gold Coast will be delivered by 5 o'clock today. Since I own 100% of the real estate holdings now, I'm terminating your lease. Effective immediately. She froze, her mouth opening into a silent, horrified gasp as the reality of her new life, a life without credit cards, without drivers, and without scraps to throw at me, finally settled into her brain. The officers led Raymond out. His head ducked low as the hallway lights caught the chrome of his cuffs. Tiffany followed him, wailing, her expensive heels clicking a frantic, desperate retreat down the long corridor. The corporate lawyers scrambled after them, packing their laptops in frantic silence, not wanting to be anywhere near the blast radius. Within 2 minutes, the boardroom was completely empty, save for me and Marcus Vance. The gray clouds outside were finally beginning to break, a sharp, pale ray of winter sunlight cutting through the glass, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It struck the polished mahogany table, casting a long shadow over the 4 shredded pieces of the old will. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city of Chicago. The wind was howling against the exterior glass, but inside it was perfectly warm. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old, scratched silver signet ring my grandfather used to wear before his hands grew too swollen from the illness. I rolled it between my fingers, feeling the cool, solid weight of it. We did it, Grandpa, I whispered against the glass, a soft, genuine smile finally breaking across my face. The wolves had spent 3 years trying to tear me apart in the dark. They thought they were the predators, but they had completely forgotten who built the cage. And they never realized that I was the one holding the key to the lock. People on the internet always say that karma is a slow, patient thing. But sometimes, if you have the right attorney, a heavy mahogany box, and a pair of scissors disguised as a willingness to lose everything, karma arrives on the 50th floor right on time and it claps its hands.